بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
In the name of Allah, and may Allah's blessing be upon His messenger Muhammad. My name Abdurrada Siri from the University of Kuwait, Kuwait. This session was supposed to be to have three panelists, but it will be Dr. Mohamed Elamin is fortunate as he will be the only and sole panelist. So it's all you have all the floor for yourself. You're going to be the actor, the producer, the director, like the comprehensive figure. So the subject of this session the Gulf media and the crisis of identity and the crisis of objectivity, or the dilemma of objectivity. So we will have the Gulf crisis and the dilemma of media objectivity. As you know, our brothers and sisters, for the last 6 months, and now we are entering into the 7th month. We hope that this month will be the beginning of probably a breakthrough in this crisis. There will be a meeting in Kuwait within 2 days, and we hope that this experience, what we are witnessing now, will be part of the past, will be something past or over us. But we as academic, as probably working in politics, I feel that the repercussions will continue for this repercussions of this crisis. So Mohamed Elamin Musa, he's a professor in Qatar University. He taught in many universities. As a professor of electronic journalism at the Department of Mass Communication and he's very knowledgeable with all the subjects. He published many studies, many academic studies and academic publishings about effective communication, foundation and applications, and the art of disguising the electronic journalism. And he published 8 books. So they are all in Arabic because the Arab world lack Arabic literature. We normally we say we have only 20 minutes, but now today and now we have all the time, the time of the whole session. So we'd like to welcome you, Dr. Mohamed.
Thank you, Dr. Rida, for the introduction. Before I begin my presentation, before I go over my research paper, I would like to draw your attention the background, the intellectual background of the project that I'm working on, in light of which I concluded this result in the past 10 years, which is I'm conducting on an attempt to reach what do we call with the effective interaction. How can we interact effectively while we live in a society or in a world where people are communicating by instinct? How can this communication be effective in order to reduce the mistakes and the problems that the world face, which will all go back or relate to human communication? How can we communicate effectively, especially in the presence of the modern technology and what humans have achieved and what resulted into globalization of communication and human relationship. This research, even if it tackles one professional aspect, which is the practice of being a journalist, but it will reach some conclusions that would suggest and that the problem of subjectivity, especially the ones that were faced by the Arab media, that they did not maintain their objectivity, which would go under the basics of the effective communication. So therefore, we should impose all of our communication under the umbrella of efficiency, as it's important for the communication in the whole world. That's why I address the topic of objectivity. Before I begin my presentation and to introduce the methodological part of it, I would like to point to the terms that I worked on. Especially, I will focus on the concept of dilemma, and I have another concept that I will focus on. I will categorize some social media. There are some media that had some problems, and some of them had a challenge. Objectivity as a term should be explained, or at least we have to take a stand with regard to that topic to know how important this topic is when it comes to being a media practitioner. So work, mostly work will, my focus will be on the Gulf crisis and how it's been said a lot about this crisis, and most of what can be concluded about it is it's unprecedented crisis in the sense it's unprecedented politically as well as communication-wise. This crisis has dragged or has put the societies in unprecedented communication problems, because this crisis was not based on any common experiences related to conflicts or differences between people who have conflicts or international relationship. There is something unexpected or uncommon in this crisis. When we talk about dispute between relatives or people who know each other, there are some experience. The crisis started in uncommon way. Some methods were uncommonly used, and here I specifically will focus on media, because media was used in an inappropriate way, because it does not match the real message of media. Here we are in front of a crisis that laid its impacts on the social media, as it's been used as a weapon in this media. I will begin with the problem that I presented in this research, which is the problem of that some social media, some media, because of this crisis, had to fall in the dilemma of objectivity. Media, one of the definitions of media is that it has the bottom line of objectivity. So if they lose media loses this bottom line of objectivity, they will go out from this definition into another practices, which we call propaganda or anything else. But it's going to be hard to be classified as media. This is a big problem where media has to, by one way or another, whether they be forced or by their choice, to go out from this classification, logical classification, which puts it, or the media, as part of the media society. And this is not an easy task. Therefore, I would focus on this aspect in my conclusion, and I will connect all of that with what Dr. Abdullah Al-Kindi talked about, in which he tackled a very important issue about our media reality, in which media has become, in which media is practicing its role now in a way does not match its original message. The problem of the research are we have some professional concepts, which one of them is objectivity. We want to see how media practiced, especially in this crisis, with the focus on the media of the blockade countries, and especially on the countries that they were forced blockade on Qatar and other countries which are observing the crisis. How did all of those countries how did they deal with this objectivity matter? I will begin with the definition of the dilemma here. According to the definition that I adopt, it's a problem that is hard to be solved, because there are some contradiction in its components, or the participants in these problems, or the members of these problems, they have exceeded their limits, and they're to the point that they cannot retreat or go back. We are reaching a point where we cannot solve this problem, and hence we have a greater problem. It's a problem that cannot be solved. What is this dilemma in this case? Media, when it loses its or abandons its the minimum benchmark of objectivity, in this case, this media will fall into a big dilemma, because it can never go back and perform its role as a media, because this minimum benchmark is part of, as we said, one of the credibility factors of this media. When media loses its least or its benchmark, then it will become no longer a means of media. The problem is more than, or the dilemma is more than a mistake or a challenge that a human or any institution face. A challenge can be dealt with, and sometimes it can be overcome. Despite of that, a man can lose honorably, but a dilemma is a dilemma because it's hard to overcome. And here, where here appears as the greater problem. The research will address these concepts and the different parts of the research with examples. Objectivity here is considered as a value, as a major value of the media interaction or communication. Media can never be called as such if there was no objectivity. But objectivity as a term is problematic. There is a lot of dispute between practitioners and researchers on this topic. Is there a real objectivity, and how far can this objectivity extend? Some people see that objectivity is a loose term. How can we reach the maximum or the minimum idealistic definition of objectivity? Those who consider media as a means of communication consider objectivity as a primary concern. All of this debate is possible, but should not leave or exceed the benchmark of objectivity. We should not sacrifice this benchmark without any I can't as a member of the media, I cannot practice my job without the minimum benchmark of objectivity. There are some people who are committed to the maximum elements of objectivity. So it's problematic and it's loose. But there are some minimum benchmarks that we should all stick to. And they mean here we should not be lying. We should not find justification for any lying or lies that should be put under objectivity. Also, frauding and tendency towards and by this we become injustice or become unjust. In this regard, media can perform other duties that can be explained as unobjective, but like previous agendas, like political editorial strategies. We're not giving any abstract realities. We can make any justification philosophically that any fact that has many aspects, I can simply focus on one aspect and present it as a fact. This is should not be considered as lying. There is some relativity with regard to objectivity, but to the point that I reach on a direct lying and changing facts, or even creating fake news, we are here now facing a new concept, a relative concept, but at the same time it is abstract and can be defined. As far as my methodology is concerned, I followed the descriptive analytical method. I mainly focused on the sample, and the people of the research. I did not follow the analytical analyzing the content of the study. I did not focus on choosing whether the sample of the study was random or intentional. I chose the clear sample, as they give us clear examples of how media has created some kind of a challenge to itself as a media, or provoking of objectivity. This is my principle in dealing with objectivity in media. Therefore, the models that I investigated, I presented a lot of examples, and these examples are clearly explained, that we all agree on, and it's already been agreed on, that lacks objectivity when it comes to dealing with objectivity in media. Within this sample, I analyzed the content, but it's not a cumulative analysis, but it's a qualitative analysis. I will take some examples, and then I will connect them some theoretical framework when it comes to scientific methods when it comes to the ethics of and the limits of practicing media that is being all agreed upon by all sectors and media parts that represent the ethics of this. The sample that I worked on or investigated included the Middle East newspaper, Uqad newspaper, the Ittihad newspaper, the Al-Yawm al-Sabi', or the seventh day in the Egyptian seventh-day newspaper, the Gulf News, the Bahraini Gulf News, as well as Sky News and Al-Arabiya, and also Al-Arabiya as well. There is also a newspaper which is called Ra'y al-Yawm, or Today's Opinion, which is a representative of the media that stands on the outskirts of the crisis. They're not with or against this crisis. I tried to work on this sample that will study and investigate the introductions or the openings of these articles, in addition to the editor-in-chief message, because they will mainly focus on the opinion factor more or less than the news itself. They don't have any original news. They just broadcast news, but the focus is mainly on the openings and the chief and the editor-in-chief message, and how they dealt with this crisis and how they perceived this crisis, whether they are with or against. Also, I would like to describe the media of the blockade countries. I would like to go over the media of the blockade countries through my own perspective. I would say that this media would include some existing media in the blockade countries and other media entities that are pre-owned by these government, and then we have some allied or pro-siege or pro-sieged counter-blockade countries. There's some initial diagnosis of these factors and how would they take their position with regard to this crisis. This media also has its own entity or identity, that it practices its job through an environment that there is no other competition from other countries that are with ending the blockade. This environment, this mono environment, or the environment that has no competition, has been available by the fact that the cyber media has been blocked, especially on the Qatari media, even on internet websites as well as media in general. These media entities, they have control on the audience, which I found as a characteristic of this media during this blockade.
One more characteristic for this media, that this media is functioning in an environment that has some kind of ban on feedback, meaning that the public in the blockading countries, they don't have the ability to interact and to present their feedback directly. And this is that was a result of the legislations and laws which were issued to prevent and ban any feedback which can be explained as sympathizing with Qatar. So we are talking about a public that is not allowed to express its opinion directly now we are living in an environment that was created some kind of abnormality in the media. If you know, if the media has the sole role of presenting information to the public, and the public has no right to practice its role as an interacting partner, and has the right to present feedback. So it's a very unique situation, and that may reflect on the objectivity that we are dealing with. When it comes to the agenda of for those blockading countries and their media, through my analysis and studying these samples, it comes very clear that the editorial policies were similar to orders, meaning that each media has no separate or individual or private policy, editorial policy, and but they were taking orders, and that actually affected the harmony that subjects were tackled with and the way these subjects were dealt with. And now we're talking, of course, about the editorial policy that differs from usual and traditional media. Supposedly that each media must have its own specific and special policy or editorial policy, and which should be considered. So we have to take this thing into consideration. Another methodology that I've covered, they were, media were wearing some kind of disguise, and they were adopting the role of propaganda. And I felt that there is some kind of hypothesis or a finding that supports the hypothesis is to sacrifice objectivity. When media turns into a campaigning or propaganda tool, it loses its objectivity. If we talk about performance, when it comes to me analyzing I don't want to when I talk to objectivity, we know that media or sources of media, they have the duty to, in order to maintain objectivity, they must practice some kind of preliminary verification of information in order to present the correct information, the correct story. And this is like the basic element, and it's probably one of the minimum requirements of any source of media. So when we deal with the performance of the media and the blockading countries, especially at the beginning of the crisis, we would find that they breached this fundamental element. And how can like a source of media, a TV channel or any other source of media can spread and false information, and even if that information was denied or that story was denied or falsified, they insist on playing it again. There were many things that we should discuss. The sudden breakout of the crisis, and that led for the media discourse to look like as if it was abnormal. The transformation was not justified from with to against, from changing its discourse from a normal one into something extraordinary. And that's a very important point. And also there is some kind of falsely involving or engaging media and practices that media has nothing to do with. And as I have mentioned, when we try to force media sources when it comes to issues like espionage, like electronic cyber hijack, hacking, we feel that that it's really difficult for those sources of media to maintain its rational. If we talk specifically about Al Arabiya and Sky News, they were forced to become partners in launching the crisis. And we find that this matter, of course, affected and will affect the professional side or professional aspect for these two TV channels. When the crisis broke out, this crisis, as I've mentioned, it made the media deal with the concept or the methodologies contradictory to media practices or professional media practices or objective media practices. And some of those means and methodology they resorted to put their opinion. For example, they use the smearing rather than expressing opinion directly through editorials or through opening articles. We have witnessed that many examples of smearing, of vilifying that should not be, we should not see in media cover, and that was a challenge, a big challenge, especially at the beginning of the crisis. So, in conclusion, the conclusion that I can reach that we are facing a crisis. We are witnessing a crisis, we are living a crisis, and we are witnessing the disappearance of objectivity. For example, we have Aqab, and we have a title that Tamim is appearing in a very weak speech full of contradictions. We in a title we should not describe we should not describe that piece of news, and we should not use, for example, exclamation marks. You know, when we talk about objectivity, I don't need to say that this speech is full of contradiction. I can only submit or present that speech, and the reader himself can find these contradictions, because people working in the media, as we have heard from Mr. Yasser Abu Halala, when he has questions, he should be able to convince us in a logic that's probably not convincing to all of us, but it's acceptable as because it represents his media work. Inside this profession, I can achieve all my goals without diverting from objectivity, as we are seeing here. And here, for example, the 7th day, we have a title saying that the Emir of Qatar, looking pale in a broken speech. And the speech says he described the speech, the Emir speech, as saying that we are suffering from internal crisis. So it's presenting unacceptable material. The title or the headline describes the Emir as having a pale face, and what is the logic behind that? What's the logic behind that justifies the use of such words? We are giving opinion. We are imposing the writer or the author is imposing his opinion upon the readers. We have Al Khaliji News. We are saying that the headline saying that the Emir of Qatar is adamant and insisting on his position. So we have clear positions or opinions. So I'm just giving you examples. Here we have I have discussed another matter. I took an example from the opposition conference, the opposition conference, the Qatari opposition conference, which was held in London. How can he are talking about a challenge rather than a dilemma? Because media made as part of its agenda that this event is an important one and should be covered or broadcasted live. But there's a problematic. It's quite problematic. How can you convince me with an opposition conference while we have only one person, one speaker? So these examples are full of contradictions, and any channel, any TV channel can fall into these contradictions. Even Al Jazeera had that as well. So there is a weakness in objectivity. So Al Arabiya and Abu Dhabi made worse, actually very worse mistakes. And this is an example of media outlets, rather than practicing their roles, is to be transformed into a tool that is not applicable to its original functions or their original functions. You know, it's like turning a journalist into an intelligence agent or a soldier, and that was not their initial or original duty, so they perform poorly. So we have Sky News broadcasting the event, and it's very interesting when we see the image. Where is we would any reader or probably public will wonder, where is this opposition? So the opposition is represented by only one person. We have the Middle East. As I have said, that it reflects the agenda of the channel, and each media outlet.
I was asked that we should move to the debate and question part. I will give you the conclusion right now. As I said earlier, through the sample that I studied, I found out that the Middle East, as a media entity, faced that challenge. They faced the objectivity challenge, but it has maintained the minimum requirement of objectivity, as it did not have to opt for using the other methods, or the methods that were used or adopted by other media. Other media, they fall into the trap of maintaining objectivity through the use of editorial strategies, and by not abiding by the ethics of media. The media that was observing the problem, represented by Ra'y al-Yawm newspaper, through my analysis to their openings, I found out that the summary of these openings is that this media is not with any part of the parties, different parties. They were, as a matter of fact, promoting the results that would explode or make the problems even worse. They would reach at conclusion at their openings, or even in the chief editor openings message, that this week or tomorrow there will be some kind of invasion or war will take place. These conclusions are always present. It seems that there is a person, that this person was not with either parties, but he or she was mainly focusing on promoting their more and more objectives on both parties. This position can be accepted as an opinion. We're not here to edit his opinion. This media played the role that they want this conflict to continue and explode even more. I mainly focused on Al Jazeera channel. I personally believe that through analyzing Al Jazeera news, that they faced the challenges, but they did not fall in any innovative traps. Al Jazeera, as it was placed by the blockading countries, as in itself is part of the crisis and is being targeted. To defend itself, Al Jazeera sacrificed some minimum parts, some minimum requirements of its objectivity. For example, Jamal Rayyan, for example, as a broadcaster, would resort to the rhetorical style more. He will depend on his rhetorical style in order to impose his opinion. This will be taken into consideration by the audience who are listening to him rather than those who are reading. When it comes to agenda, Al Jazeera highlighted some news of UAE news and put as a priority, regardless of whether this news should be broadcasted or not, because simply Al Jazeera has its own standards. Sometimes we find that some news are not worth to be broadcasted because they're not in the Al Jazeera interests, because simply the country that it is in does not broadcast all the news that it has. This is a challenge that Al Jazeera faced, that Al Jazeera had to fight for its survival and defend itself. And move on to I move on now to the obstacle of maintaining objectivity. This obstacle focuses on the media intelligence. There is some kind of weakness in media intelligence. Media is not a weapon to be used in words. If it's used, it's not a traditional one. As if we use media, we're just using like mass destruction weapons. It will affect the user as much as it will affect the victim. There should be some kind of intelligence in employing media intelligence. There should be some kind of some people would prefer to opt for the being on neutral side, because simply you know that you make lies today and people will forgive them tomorrow, because if any media loses its credibility, it will be very hard for it to retain it again. As I said, it's a very crucial matter. To conclude, the use of media as a weapon without paying attention to its specification and characteristics is catastrophic. It will affect media from this perspective. Now we are in an age where traditional media methods that lacks the minimum requirements of professionalism will be a failure investment. They will lose a lot of their audience because of the social media. If they lose the rest of their credibility, they will end up as what's been invested in is being lost simply. The request of the closing of Al Jazeera channel shows that media or professional media is very important, but it will cause a lot of problem if one side adopts some policies, and these policies are known initially that they have some unacceptable things. If I intentionally made mistakes, it will be very difficult for the other parties to explore or to resolve or to show my mistakes. No one wants to close Al Jazeera because it's a bad channel, but because that the practicing of good or professional media will cause problems to others. Al Jazeera channel faced a big channel. And this is one of the conclusions that I arrived at. The last point that we benefit from as Arab countries, especially Gulf countries, is that we should re-evaluate our relationship with the media, because media is not a means that can be used and will not be affected by consumption. Media is an institution, a dangerous institutions that play a major role, and the wrong use of them will have a big effect on the society. I would like to thank Dr. Mohamed Musa for his presentation. Our session, it's a one-man show, so all questions and comments would be directed to you only, Doctor. We have 15 to 20 minutes for debate and questions. If you have any questions or inquiries, please introduce yourself where you work in. I would like to thank you, Doctor, because you transferred us from objectivity to non-objectivity. I wanted, although I hope that I wanted to learn about the media of the pro-Qatar countries and how they stood, how they acted when it comes to objectivity, as well as the West also media and how they have they seen this crisis. Dr. Yaqub Al-Kandari from Al-Kuwait University. I have one comment, a simple comment here, and there's another question, a simple objectivity is a relative thing that cannot be measured. We cannot say that this channel is 100% objective and that one has nil objectivity. All channels they lack objectivity, whether it was Al-Arabiya, Arabic channels, or even Western channels. Sometimes they lose credibility or objectivity. The topic of talking about Al Jazeera or addressing Al Jazeera specifically, showing it as if you are defending Al Jazeera, I totally agree with you that Al Jazeera is a great shift in media in the Arab world. And I agree also that Al Jazeera is a pioneer in its field, globally and regionally, I would say. But to say whether it's biased or not, in Kuwait, we suffered from Al Jazeera non-bias. Even Jazeera, with our relationship with the Qatari people. I don't want to live in Qatar and say that Al Jazeera is non-biased or biased. I want to look at Qatar and then decide whether it's biased or not. Another question here. You used, in your analysis of the content, used a sample. I wish that you had focused on one unit, let's say a newspaper or certain newspapers, and to comment on. What is the analysis method? Did you choose? I only saw one sample of Al-Arabi newspaper. Did you compare with other newspapers or with Twitter? What is the analysis unit that you used? We'll take 2-3 questions and then we'll give the floor to the speaker to answer.
الصوت واضح؟
Can you hear me?
الصوت واضح؟ طيب أول شيء أنا أشكر
I can't hear the.
دكتور محمد لأنه
I would like to thank Dr. Mohamed
الذي قدم
because he is the only one.
لكن يكون صاد ما أعتقد أن أحد يعني
I don't think that that anyone here criticized Al Jazeera in this matter or in this way.
في حالة الجزيرة احنا
In the Al Jazeera case, we want to rectify its and we know if it makes any mistakes. I know that there is a shock that was caused to Al Jazeera. We're criticizing Al Jazeera because we love it. Al Jazeera used. They focused on some women rights in Saudi, whether also some poverty cases in Al Jazeera on Saudi, and the director of Al Jazeera, Yasser Abu Hilala, was always defending this position. Do you think that Al Jazeera has exceeded the ethical lines? I like to thank Dr. Al-Kandari for his comments and his questions as well. I totally disagree with you. Al Jazeera channel, I'm not here to defend Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is a professional channel. What do you mean by professionalism here? It means that you play your role in the right way. We know that those who like sports, if you remember Maradona, in one day, in one of the World Championship, he scored one goal in his hand, and Argentina won the World Cup. Media has a game and it has a framework. They should play within that framework. Whether they become biased or not, this is not a problem with objectivity. Objectivity is relativity and should not reach a level where a human or a person. I can manipulate, for example, if I'm an accountant on taxes, but I would never reach the point where I steal my company. This is the problem that we had fallen. Al Jazeera defends itself that I have not created or fabricated any news. Even if there were any mistakes committed, Al Jazeera will confess that, will admit that. Al Jazeera faced a lot of channels. What are these channels? Challenges, sorry. Al Jazeera, since the Arab Spring, was the only channel that would look at, conceived as an entity that is part of the event. Al Jazeera was taking the position of which is with the Arab Spring, and it also at the same time encouraging people to carry on in their path. This is some kind of bias. Bias is not something unacceptable, I would say. We would never say that there is no channel that is biased. Humans, you can never live with people without being with or against a certain party. Al Jazeera is biased, but within a certain acceptable framework. How the West perceive this media? When the CNN approached the news of the Iraqi invasion or the invasion of Iraq, they were used as a means of media or a war media to support the war against Iraq. Al Jazeera here is not in a position to defend it, but it has managed, despite all of the circumstances, the contradicting circumstances, it is still a channel that you were being accused of several things, and you were being asked to be simply closed as if you are executing it. So it's following all the possible means. But Al Jazeera is very keen on not following the unjustifiable means to defend itself. But Al Jazeera still insists that it should not be abandoned or closed by the others. Al Jazeera has been faced with a lot of criticism, and we know that it has lost some popularity, but until the crisis now it's retaining its popularity again. If you find any news Al Jazeera, you would believe that it is authentic. You cannot simply focus 24 hours on the Al Jazeera. When Al Jazeera had waged a war against the Egyptian regime, Al Jazeera used the weapon, which is broadcasting. It broadcasts anything that happens there, even a simple protest. With 10 people only, which is a very critical matter, I would say, in media, but it's still much better than fabricating news. There is a problem in media here, which is called digging on the small news. On criticizing Al Jazeera, I'm responding to Amina here. Al Jazeera was very selective, and it has an editorial policy, and it has agenda. But this agenda would never leave the media framework. So this is how we should perceive Al Jazeera. It is a media that's practicing its role in the right way and within the laws, and it is trying to commit itself. And I would say it is the only institute, or the only media entity that broadcasts the code of ethics and what should be followed to the public. You can, as a viewer, you can simply ask Al Jazeera whether their news are genuine or not. Al Jazeera is keen on not falling on committing such untrue or practices. Al Jazeera managed to maintain its objectivity. I feel really sad that Al Arabiya it loses its credibility, not on a relative matter, but it practices something. How could you ask me as a media source to fabricate news? This is very harmful to the practitioner, those who practice media. We should not reach this level as an Arab media source. Any questions? In the name of God, more gracious, more graceful. You focused on Al Jazeera. My name is Dr. Zakaria Matar. I was the head of the Islamic Committee of the Shaw. I'm an economic consultant.
كانت تبع رابطة العالم الإسلامي والدكتور محمد موسى القرني كان رئيسها وعبد الله نصيف كان اللي بيمولها. سيادتك
You focused on Al Jazeera mainly. I have some media. They did a great job, and they were like Abdullah Al-Azmi and Malik Al-Harbi, and even they play this role in social media. The reason why the reason of the distinction of the Qatari media is that they are right, on the right path. You're talking about the values. You're talking the values of the Sisi media. There is a point here about Al Jazeera. One of the things that would set Al Jazeera as a distinctive entity is that its director is who's from Jordan, is one of the blockade countries who lead Al Jazeera, who are facing other. It's a sign of elegance on the way they deal with the crisis. You can never leave this side without even commenting on it, which is the role of the Qatari media practitioners. I'm a student at the University of Qatar. I had the honor that I was educated by Dr. Mohamed, or taught by Dr. Mohamed. We should always remember that we are in an academic place. We should always not be biased when we analyze. I totally disagree with doctors on the fact that the gist of Qatar is cause and the objectivity of practicing media. We have to split. We have to divide between or to differentiate between these two sectors. I'm not going to add anything regarding Al Jazeera. No one would deny that Al Jazeera is a renowned entity in media, but we can sometimes disagree with you that within a certain framework they will commit to objectivity. If Al Jazeera speech regarding the war against Yemen, and then the transfer, the overall transfer into that thing, in my point of view, Al Jazeera has fallen in that part, especially when they dealt with the Yemeni problem before and after the crisis. If we talk about ethical problems of the blockading countries and using them in the political aspects, if you don't think that this will harm Al Jazeera in its objectivity, what else do you think would be? We should criticize objectively as well. We try to rely most on the development of Al Jazeera, and we're proud of it when it develops and improves. Since there is a bad media that practices and it's crossing all the red lines, this does not give the Al Jazeera the right to follow their steps. They used such terms, they use terms that are unacceptable on the media. There are some reports. Don't you think that this is also a decrease in their objectivity? I wish I had seen some reference to Qatari newspapers. There were no comments on Al Jazeera newspapers.
Take over.
Yeah, please.
Normally, as an organizer, I would not interfere. I refuse to have this kind of disagreements. We arranged for this conference to analyze the role of media in the crisis. All the media outlets in the Arab countries may have pros and cons, and each person has the right to express his opinion, whether praising or criticizing. I just wanted for Dr. Mohamed to allow us. He's been subjected to any intellectual intimidation. He has the total freedom to criticize Al Jazeera or other outlets, and he is, as an academic, dealing with it in an objective way. And I would like to thank you for this intake, and I would like, we appreciate your opinion. When it comes to Dr. Zakaria's point, as I have mentioned and expressed in the beginning, this research is based on a sample, on purpose or objective sample. And I consider scientific research as part of creative. So science is not, and I find a certain problem, and I try to answer it scientifically. In this context, I summarized the anti-blockade media, and I summarized that with a representation of Al Jazeera, because it's not only a strong voice, but also when it comes to objectivity, I consider it, and that was my personal opinion. I can improve it scientifically. It can understand what is the objectivity and its importance in its work. You know, there is a saying which says that the credibility and honesty of the tradesman is very important. So Al Jazeera senses the importance of objectivity. The other thing, with the Qatari media, there was another issue, but I did not pay big attention because it was some kind of a reactionary characteristic, because there is no point, there was no way to find or to conclude that Qatari media outlets did better than the rest. Maybe we can say, of course, that the Qatari media outlets were defending Qatar. My focus on Al Jazeera was till the first 10 days dealt with the matter as it was an ordinary thing, until it was targeted and it was under accusation. So it deployed its heavy weaponry and heavy ammunition, if I can say that. When we have Fawzi Bushra's, he's a journalist at Al Jazeera, and he wrote reports and features. We can focus on individual cases. His reports, of course, Fawzi Bushra, are very explosive. So it is not. He's not a news report, mentioning facts. It was a report where a case was tackled, and he analyzed it, logic. He deployed all the means in order to get the highest rates of viewing. So the advantage Al Jazeera has, that it can play the game in the correct way. So Al Jazeera is a professional player. In this sense, when I talk about the transformation of Al Jazeera when it comes to the stance in Yemen, Al Jazeera had a certain editorial policy, and the way they tackled Yemen was changed, and so a media outlet, we cannot deal with it as the sole source of information or facts. Each media outlet has agenda and has targets, and should do that within the framework of profession. So it's the media outlet, any media outlet has no problem in changing its editorial policy, and one of the rules stipulates that the journalist has to resign if, for example, editorial policies have changed. So I was working in a newspaper, and a new editor, a new chief or chairman came and changed the policy, and that's why I should resign. So it's not something not acceptable. I hold Al Jazeera accountable, for example, when what Al Jazeera was doing when it was supporting Yemen. It used to practice silence. Many things were taking place, but Al Jazeera resorted to silence as it was not part of its editorial policy. When things took place, especially committed by the coalition, it kind of shied off from covering that news or kept silent, and we can hold it morally accountable. But it's not considered a crime in objectivity. The crime in objectivity when you fabricate news, when you do something that the ethics of the profession can hold you responsible, when you defend the right or the wrong. It's all happening within the frame of the profession. The profession doesn't require you to be the good guy and to seek the truth, but you should not be isolated. And the profession doesn't require you to be isolated, and because it doesn't exist. In all over the world, media outlets are similar to other entities, and other entities, for example, a person can talk about freedom, but nobody can live or practice freedom as he wants or as she wants. All freedoms have constraints, so I can't do anything. I can't have the total freedom. So media outlets, in context, in frameworks, they should maintain the minimum requirement of objectivities. And I would like to deal with the terminology in an academic way. When I talk about the minimum level, it means that there are medium levels and maximum levels. And yesterday, when the BBC was mentioned, for example, in 1983, it cannot be unbiased, in the Falkland War, especially when many people, the majority of people, were sympathizing with Argentina, but BBC was not able to stay Russian, unbiased. So when we talk about media outlets, if you want to demonize Qatar, I can do that, but not necessarily by hacking a website, because that's a crime. But there are media means, I can use methodology similar to Al Jazeera, and by time people will discover that state is carrying out certain practices, and this is a legitimate thing in the media work. Do you have any other questions? This is the last question. Thank you so much. I was not present since the beginning of the lecture. Can you introduce Abdul Latif Haider, master's students of master studies in Doha and from Yemen. When it comes to the unbiased of Al Jazeera, especially when in Yemen, we heard Mr. Yasser Abu Lala when he answered about the coverage of Al Jazeera about Yemen. Airstrikes were not covered, and the situation in the north and in the north under the Houthi control, and also focus. He mentioned that mistakes were committed, and the mistakes occurred were not covered. As a Yemeni, Al Jazeera for us is a big thing, especially during the revolution and supporting the Arab Springs. The sudden change that took place, and it's true that the political crisis and the political situation in the region affected it, but we cannot compare Al Jazeera with Al Arabiya or Sky News Al Jazeera have maintained an intellectual image that it is an objective channel, and
يعني مع اختلافنا مع الحسين التام، مع اختلافنا مع الانقلاب بشكل عام، لكن لا يعني ذلك
it doesn't mean that to be part in the conflict. Can you please, can you as your question, can this bias, we try to play around this, whether we call it bias or objectivity? In short, it is objectivity, because bias is not a problem. It's not against objectivity in media. Being biased is a normal thing. I would like, when we look into a media outlet as Al Jazeera, as a community, as an entity, as a life entity, and this entity has its needs, has its policies, and so for example, my position is against Houthis. That's talking about Al Jazeera. So Houthis, initially, Al Jazeera was against the Houthis and used to host Houthis. But after a while, there was a problem when it comes to hosting figures from Houthis. But let us just think that the editorial policy for Al Jazeera has changed, and so media figures they don't represent goodness and the truth in the world. The media can practice many things. We can disseminate information, and we know very well that it only has a part of the truth. So media, as a profession, as a practice, is some kind of communication and has certain foundations. When we respect these foundations, we practice our roles, but it's not necessarily that this media is evil or is good. And this comes within the frame of the profession. So if we look at the media and from this angle, we would find that the problem is not to be with or against or to exaggerate things. This is within media. It's all legitimate. As in other sectors in the society can practice their duties, and for example, I practice when we talk, for example, in the context of police and robber, the thief or robber would think that the policeman is not humane. And we talk about ethics as well. When we discuss these ethics were established by journalists. Journalists themselves said that we are allowed to do such and so. But there are red lines. There are things that we cannot take. I can shed a light on part of the truth, and this is a human thing. We don't have a human being that can see everything. So as long as I'm very selective, when I select, I have to select something that really exists. In an event which I consider not very important, it looks like it feels that I've turned a blind eye. I've turned my back. I cannot be criminalized to do so. But the problem that the event itself does not exist, and I merely fabricate that event. And I will give you an example. In the ethics of journalism, certain people say that it's not from the ethics of the profession is to pay a bribe or to steal in order to get information to be used in an investigation or a report or investigatory. But for example, British say that if this matter was in the favor or serves the interest of the public or to disclose certain people, it's okay to do that. So it's quite relevant. people and the media know very well that you cannot force me to do something that is not within the nature of my duties. Ask me to, or maybe I want to, for the picture or for the image to look in a certain way, but to tell me that we want, for example, to hack a news agency, I would tell you, it's not logical, for example, for a news agency being the fastest way to spread the news. It cannot actually be delayed in spreading the news and taking hours in spreading the news. So, or to put the words in somebody else's mouth. I would tell you I cannot create or fabricate a video where that person did not say these words. So you put me as a media outlet in a problem, in a dilemma that I cannot get out of. So media outlets, give it some freedom, give it the potentials to work, and it can serve your purpose. For example, Al Jazeera, if we have instructions to carry out certain things, who is the so it can do its duties in a better way, because one of the problems in the Arab world is that media outlets are controlled by people who have no understanding of the function or the work of media outlets. So when it's used, so media is not like a gun or a pistol to be placed under the pillow. It's media is very similar to weapons of mass destruction. Okay, we would use the weapon of time. I would like to thank you Dr. Mohamed Elamin on your behalf for his presentation, and he covered 3 presentations in one, and probably this is the only session that concludes on its time. And I would like, on your behalf, I would like to thank Al Arab Center for studies and policies, the organizer of this conference, and I hope that this tradition will continue every year with the professionalism and with the comprehensive vision, scientific Arab vision, and we hope that in our next gathering we would overcome this crisis that has hit the Gulf region and the Arab world, and we try to be optimistic, but unfortunately it's not merely wishful thinking. I don't want to be characterized as pessimistic, but hopefully within the coming 2 days we would see indications of a real breakthrough. Thank you so much. We'd like to thank you again for this presentation, which is scientifically proven, and disagreement is a healthy matter, and it's a good thing. Thank you so much. Thank you all.